Welcome, everyone. We are here with Brian Thomas Swimme, who I had an opportunity to meet at an IONS conference, I believe, about 5 or 6 years ago, and heard him speak there as well as at the SAND conference, one of my favorite conferences. And then later, he was able to grace on the TEDx Berkeley stage this past year with some of his new work. And so for those of you who are new to Brian's work, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background about who he is and what he's been doing. Currently, he's the director of the Center for the Story of the Universe and a professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco. His PhD is for his work in gravitational dynamics, but this led him into a much deeper fascination with cosmology. He's the author of The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos, The Universe is a Green Dragon, and co-author of The Universe Story, which is a result of a 10-year collaboration with cultural historian Thomas Berry, who I absolutely want to meet. Brian's also the creator of 3 educational video series, Canticle to the Cosmos, The Earth's Imagination, and The Powers of the Universe. And he also co-wrote and hosted the film, The Journey of the Universe, which aired on PBS. And he lectures everywhere. As I mentioned, I've personally heard you speak at a bunch of different places, but you've also talked at the World Bank, UNESCO, the UN Millennium Peace Summit, and countless other venues. So I am so excited that you're here to talk to us today about, among other things, cosmogenesis.
Great to be here, Renee. Thank you.
Super excited. So anyway, one of the things that led me to your work for the first time, or really drew me to your work and got me so excited, was when I first saw you on stage. And this was, pre-cosmogenesis. It was really your passion for the universe. Mm-hmm. So now this may not sound odd if, I were a physicist or a scientist or a mathematician, but I'm not, right? I'm a publicist and an artist, right? And I do lead spiritual events, but still, this is a far cry. So I never really thought much of the universe. And then I saw you on stage and I thought, I need to know more about the universe. So what was the first moment for you where, you started in math and then suddenly the universe was the most exciting thing?
Yeah, well, it actually started before I knew the math. I grew up in the Northwest of America, and it rains a lot there. So it's a big deal when you can see the stars. And so I began life having my bed right next to the window. It wasn't my idea, and we had these lacy curtains, but I would lie there. I remember back to when I was, like 4 or 5. I don't remember further back, but 4 or 5, I was amazed by the stars, simply amazed. That's all. I was just a little kid, and I was in wonder of them, and I didn't know what they were, but something deep was taking place. So that really is where it began.
But then why math? What drew you to math? Was that a way to figure out the universe because of Einstein's equations? And I went into mathematics with the desire, the sole desire to understand the universe. That was I had a name. I was called Brian Thomas Swimme, but my real essence was a desire to know the universe. So that's who I was. The way to study the universe as a whole in science is cosmology, is observational cosmology and mathematical cosmology. And I was interested in the mathematics. I was just so amazed about learning about the ways in which the universe organizes itself. I still am. I never got over it. But if that's math is, I would go out there and fly around the universe if I could, but I can't. So I explore it with the mathematical equations. Yeah. Not yet, anyway.
Not yet. Yes, not yet. Maybe someday.
There was one of your early mentors who I think I would have hit it off with, by the way. She said that you suffered from unconscious intellectual arrogance, which is a bit of a blow for a student, but in a way it helped you. It seems like that was a moment of, maybe not exactly when she said that, but some of her other observations where it kind of moved you out of your traditional path of academia into more of your path of your truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that I stayed with the academic study of the universe and of anything, but what I learned was I didn't know I was arrogant, and the arrogance consisted of one thing. I believed that the way to really understand things was science, and everything else was okay, but not as great. And I subsequently I learned that there are many different ways of learning the truth of reality, and science is one powerful one, but it's one among many.
Yeah, and that sort of brings us to the fact that they have been separated for so long. But yet, if you look way back, right? Philosophy, history, and the culture path, of course, you dove into Aristotle. Of course, you had to, right? And Pythagoras, right? And then you came across the music of the spheres.
Yeah.
I love that, right? Because as a musician, I kind of got excited about that. You were making the analogy that the mathematical order of the universe was similar to the inner experience of listening to pluck strings on an instrument.
Yeah.
Right? So put another way, math bridged the outer world of the universe with the inner qualities of the mind and the soul. So this part is super cool, everyone. Everything in the universe worked together to give birth to a song utterable through symbols, right? Which is how mathematicians see the world. But also it was a segue from math into something else for you, right? I mean, you said to your students during that same chapter in your life, you need to ride inside the mathematical symbols. And then later wrote, I could feel their presence as if a silent music radiated off the books and enveloped me. Right? Mathematicians don't write like this.
But like you say, Renee, if you go back in time, there was a time when things were united, like with Pythagoras.
Yeah.
And he really felt something that he called the music of the spheres. I don't know if he invented that phrase, but I think musicians like yourself can feel it. And the mathematical equations are describing it, but it's the same thing looked at from two different angles.
So what was that you must have had an epiphany though at that time, right? Because you even said when that flew out of your mouth, you don't know where it came from.
Yeah. It was the realization that well, maybe I'll put it this way. It blows my mind when I think of the fact that there was a time when we couldn't count. Sounds so silly almost, but we couldn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there are indigenous groups today that haven't learned that. And so my orientation is to reflect on the incredible fact that at one time we were apes, and now here we are. So throughout the millions of years of living as apes, a very very close, we're 99% identical to chimpanzees. So millions of years ago we were chimpanzees, and then we developed all of this. God, it blows my mind. So that we learned to count, we learned about mathematics. Mathematics ultimately is about relationships. And so that we learned we could we could grok. You know that word grok?
Yeah.
We could grok the relationships that pervaded the universe. I mean, just think about us living on this planet, going around a star, one star among 200 billion in the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy is one of 2 trillion galaxies. And yet we can feel the order of the entire universe, this little tiny dot. So yeah, that experience, I would say it was the experience, a direct experience of the order of the universe. And I think that's what Pythagoras was talking about. And, Albert Einstein, he felt something, I think, similar.
Yeah.
And so that is the epiphany.
Yeah. I mean, he did. He wrote about it a lot. Herbie Hancock once told me when I was going through some struggle in my life, he said, Renee, don't you know we all have access to the universe? Most people just don't realize it. And so what Einstein was doing, sleeping in his chairs and taking all these naps, as he was connecting to the expanding universe.
There's one story about Einstein I'd love to tell you. Is that okay? I met a man who was the son of a psychologist who interviewed a number of brilliant scientists. Einstein was one of them, and he was interviewing them to understand their way of creativity. And among the scientists, what he learned is that some of them thought geometrically, and others thought in terms of analysis. But when they got to Einstein, he said something entirely different. He said this: I think more in terms of my body. I think in terms of my muscles, in terms of, and that just blew my mind. But I mean, listen, that his body was constructed by the universe. So inside our body, in the structure of our body, is the ultimate order of the universe. So that's how close it is to us. The essence of the universe is also the essence of the chemical constructions of our body.
But the key is, how do we access it, right? How do we get all the out of the way to get, I mean, obviously meditation, right? I mean, meditation is a big way that people get to the still point and they get more clarity, but not the clarity that someone like Einstein got.
How do you clear it out, Renee?
I'm not a great meditator like my other half, but what I do, it's nature for me. So we live on the water. I get out on a paddle board. I literally feel like I can talk to the ducks and they're talking back to me. So I've always had that. We don't have any animals, which is kind of astonishing, really. I've had moments with horses where I feel like I telepathically can communicate with them and they're understanding me. It's the most bizarre thing. But I think I would say, nature just really, and being, if I'm out on water and there's just nothing, and sometimes, I don't do it so much on the lagoon where we live now, but on the bigger one, I used to go out sometimes at night and there's no lights out there at night.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So you fall off a paddleboard, whatever. But luckily I'm a good swimmer, but I would just go out on the paddleboard and just be under the stars.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I wish I was a better meditator, because I do think, and certainly the research coming out of ions and all of, the normal suspects, heart math, they're all pointing to, when you get into that theta brainwave state and you calm the mind down, not only do you get into heart coherence, but you have access to more stuff. So I think it's different for everybody, though. And I think the most important thing now is to not make anyone wrong how they get there.
Absolutely. And what you just described to me would be a powerful form of meditation. And wow, you were, it involved quieting down. You have to pay attention and still the mind. And then and then you are congruent with the universe out there. It's a beautiful image. I love it.
Yeah, I need nature. I don't understand structures of, I don't think we were meant to be in concrete structures. We're used to looking over the plains of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think nature is one of the most powerful pathways into the universe. I'm not surprised to hear it from you.
So let's touch on something we have to at least touch upon, even though we're all hoping that it's on its way out. And that's of course, the materialism and reductionist ways of looking at science. But now people are experiencing things that they can't explain. So they want answers beyond what materialism can provide. And they want answers, on the other side of the fence, they want answers beyond the rigid churches and temples on the other side, right? In the middle lays this personal experience. And words that you use is a new way of knowing.
Yeah.
So I call it the internal compass or the higher self. Some people call it God. People in our community are calling it Godde, God, the feminine face of God or the divine. But you said in your book that science for you was a holy search for truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I think one way to I like the way you put it, that we have modern science in its Newtonian form on one side, and then we have a number of traditional religions that can tend to sink into a rigid orthodoxy. And so what is the area in between? What's the area in between? It's not easy to talk about because we can't rely on what we learned in the past. But there is a way in which some of the deepest insights from reductionist science or from rigid orthodoxy, some of those deepest insights still remain true, but we've gone beyond. Gone beyond in this sense. Our context for understanding them has become deeper and wider. So the subtitle of my book is an unveiling of the expanding universe. So I'm responding to your question by going to one of the central things of the book. It's to say the universe is expanding is the first level of knowledge, but we've gone deeper into that. And what I'm about to say comes from Stephen Hawking, who's died recently, but is really one of the finest mathematical cosmologists of our era. And what Hawking did, it is very simple in a certain sense. All he did was ask this question. So the universe is expanding, by which I mean all of the galaxies are moving away from each other. Fine. And Hawking asked this question: what would have happened if the expansion were different? And then what he discovered is it's the most amazing fact of cosmology in the last 10,000 years. I mean it.
Yeah.
So what he discovered was that if the expansion had been a little bit faster, the elementary particles would have formed atoms, but the atoms themselves would not have formed galaxies. So the universe would have scattered into dust, atomic dust. And so then he said, well, what if the expansion had been a little bit slower? And he found out that in that case, the expansion would have only lasted around 1 million years, and then it would collapse down to a black hole. So we have these two scenarios, infinite dust or a black hole. And then he asked this question, how much give was there? And what he determined in his paper in the 1970s was that you couldn't alter the expansion even as much as 1 part in 10 to the 60th, which I just summarized very quickly by saying, if the expansion had been a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of 1% faster, dust. If the expansion had been a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of 1% slower, black hole. Now, explain that one. All right. You see, we can't explain it.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Not in terms of Newtonian science. Why is it so exact? We can't explain it with the reductionist science. We can't explain it with rigid orthodoxy because they didn't even know about it. So we're left, here we are, and we're left face to face with a profound form of intelligence that we don't even have a name for yet. Just like you said, we can call it anything we like, but we don't have a name. It's too recent. But that is how I think about what's in the middle between Newtonian science and rigid religion.
Yeah, I mean, the first word, of course, that came to mind as you were saying that, well, it's clearly a very intelligent universe.
Yeah.
Or design, because there's multiverses. It's not just this one universe. So it's a infinite, smart, brilliant, connected design.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's beyond our thinking, clearly. I mean, quantum physics is beyond our thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the hope is that, like I say, we used to be apes that couldn't count at all past 10, Now look at us. But still, we're in process. So we're going to learn so much more. We're going to develop so many new capacities.
Yeah, no, so true that it's ever changing. You mentioned Eckhart, who spoke of a human being giving birth to God in every moment, and that the quantum physicist spoke of the quantum fields giving birth to vertical particles in every moment. What I find astonishing, I'm sure you do, even though bridges are being made, that, ancient spiritual thought, right, is really drawing parallels to what's happening now in quantum physicists. And yet there's really little budge, right? There's really little movement. Why do you think that is? Besides, people hanging on to their old ideas and just be unwilling to change.
Well, that, first of all, what you just described as a reason, I think is the major reason. It's terrifying to find ourselves in a universe that we don't understand. It's truly terrifying. It's like what happens when parents take a child aside and say, you're not our child. I know you've fought this for all these years, but the hard truth is you're actually not our child. And then that's a hard thing to take in. So I have a lot of compassion for humanity in this time of that we've discovered so much, and it's mind-blowing, and it's just hard to take that in, to integrate that. I mean, Renee, you and your partner and myself and so many others, we will be working on this the rest of our lives, Yes. And we have to be patient with ourselves. We're part of a vast movement of deepening. See, that's why I called the book Cosmogenesis. Its genesis is like it's ongoing. It's not just a cosmos we live in. We live in a cosmogenesis. Everything is evolving.
Yeah.
So that I think we have to be patient with ourselves and our colleagues. I think we are actually in the process of building this new coherent, interdisciplinary, collaborative understanding, but it's going to take time.
Yeah, I love, so the other issue, right, which I guess Thomas Berry raised, and of course, it made me crack up and laugh out loud at 3 o'clock in the morning. He called it intellectual sickness.
Yeah.
Right. I cracked up because, I used to work for an organization. I was in the marketing department, and there were more PhDs it was Dragon Naturally Speaking.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Recognition. So I used to head up their corporate communications. And when I showed up there, I was one of the few non-PhDs, but I had to deal with them every single day. And but I learned a lot, right? I mean, it was around that time I saw the play when Einstein meets Picasso. I don't know if you've ever seen the play. It's brilliant. It's a comedy. It's, how they're arguing each other's sides and they can't come together until they realize when they do sit together, the beautiful blend that happens when they do. I don't think it was a mistake or an accident, I should say, that I watched that at the exact same time I was dealing with all these PhDs. Yeah. Anyway, that made me laugh. You wrote that we tend to become so fascinated with our symbols, and I'll add theories as an outsider.
Yeah.
That we push aside life altogether and a pathological desire to live in the symbols. And I think that's part of what's going on. And so even though I think this book is brilliant for mainstream because it's so digestible, I think there are lessons in there for the scientists and the mathematicians as well, right?
Yeah.
So what Thomas says, right, if this is the case, then what really matters is life itself. In other words, our experience. And I loved your response as you were having a dialogue with him. And he says, the actions of the universe. And you said, and? Like, that's it? Actions of the universe? Like, what else? Like, what does that mean, right? And so that part was just very funny to me. But then, he goes on to explain that we reduce our human consciousness down if we reduce it down to mathematical equations if we don't have the human experience in there. And it sounds like what he's saying is not just the human experience, but the experience of the universe.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Exactly. Yeah.
But what does he mean by actions of the universe for people who are new to this and haven't read your book yet?
It would be very much what you experience when you're on your paddleboard and the thoughts have dropped out of your mind, and not just irritating thoughts like, I should have gone to Safeway and got some food, all of those for sure, but even high-level theories about what is taking place. And like you said, you're including theories in that quotation, not just symbols. Absolutely, that's right. But it's difficult. It's difficult to actually sink down to a place that is before the theories. Mm. And I know that that feeling. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes you're caught up in it, but other times when it happens, that experience is what he was getting at.
Do you mean in a primordial kind of way, or?
I mean it's a wordless knowing of your existence there. You're rocking with the waves, right? You're on a paddleboard, but you're not thinking of it as a paddleboard. It's simply part of this direct experience of the universe. Later, you can write about it and theorize about it, and that's great. But in the moment itself, it's more immediate and it's deeper. That's why we call some people heady. I think I'm a very heady person. A good example of is myself. But even so, even if we are highly cerebral and intellectual, there's still the possibility of a direct experience of the forces of the universe. And that's what I meant about when I use the phrase. It's an odd phrase I used, ride the symbols into the universe.
Love
So
that.
I use this myself. I use the science to understand what an ocean is, what moonlight is, and so forth. But nevertheless, you get to a certain place when the encounter is deeper and it's wordless. You know?
Oh, I love that. It's deeper and it's wordless.
And that's what Thomas Berry meant by experiencing the universe. And it can happen in the kitchen. You know, it doesn't have to be on a fantastic body of water or in a forest. It's easier in a forest for sure, but you could be in the kitchen and making scrambled eggs and realize that the metal inside the pan you're using to scramble the eggs, that metal came from an exploding star. You can have that experience and realize, wow, I'm part of this ongoing development of an exploding star.
How to unwire our kids and raise our children to think in a more unified way.
Yeah, and just maybe briefly, because once you get the feel for it, it's really kind of easy. So, what we learn as children is that Cheerios come from the yellow box. I mean, we sort of locate it there, and where does hamburger come? It comes from the meat department at Safeway. But if you carry it back, all right. So the Cheerios, they're made from wheat, and wheat was cultivated 9,000 years ago by humans, but the wheat itself is the energy that's captured from the sun. And even take it further. So when you're eating Cheerios, you're actually eating energy from the sun. We all know this. See, we know it.
Actually, a lot of people don't know it.
Good. So then, but it's just to realize, wow, that all of the plants, all the life forms on our planet Earth are filled with energy from the sun. But when you're eating something, you realize this actually came from a star, and then it goes back even further, because where did the sun get its energy? And it got its energy by a contraction of a cloud, and where did the cloud, back in time, billions of years ago, where did the cloud get its energy? From the initial expansion of the universe. So 14 billion years ago, the universe erupted and expanded apart. Some parts of it contracted into stars. So when you're eating Cheerios, you're eating the light from the sun, which is the energy from the birth of the universe. It is, you see, and that's to break out of the industrial industrial worldview that food comes from the grocery stores and everything is wrapped up in a human world. Break out of it into nature as a whole, the universe. And God, just watching the little kid's face change when you tell them these stories. I mean, it doesn't take them long to get it. It's harder for us.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right, because for them, they're closer to remembrance, if you like, of their original energy form.
Yeah.
Other thing, let's go back into real life scenarios, because that's the other thing about your book that I can't hold up because I only have the manuscript, that you bring your own life into it. So we just mentioned the example of how you were interacting with your son when he was having all these questions. But this is the part, certainly I'm pretty new to quantum physics. Started reading books maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I can't put them down. Like the more that come in, the more I want to read, right?
That's great.
So, it depends on which quantum physicists you talk to, whole probabilities thing. But what I loved, it was brilliant, actually. So you were talking about probabilities of meeting your partner. I don't know if you want to use the example of your partner or some other example that you would like.
There's a tribe of Indians in South America, and I guess I want to bring them in at this point because what they say is really great. They say unless one contemplates the immensities in the universe, one cannot become human.
Wow.
I just love that. You see, and so when I think of you on, out there in the water and under the stars and so forth, that's contemplating the immensities. You're in the immensities. And my way of saying it is, and others, I'm not saying I made this up, but you're out there in the immensities of water and of stars and of night, that you are the immensities contemplating themselves. That's what's taking place there. And you're aligning with these powers. But that's what's so great, that you go on a paddleboard, because you have to align yourselves with the powers of the universe in order to keep floating along there. And it's the real possibility. There's a real possibility of mistake. There's a real possibility of failure, and that's what's frightening about making decisions and choices. So I want to emphasize the fact that when we do make decisions, they're on a spectrum of right and wrong, a big long spectrum. Okay, so given that, my way of thinking is, and now here this is speculation, and a lot of scientists would disagree with this. It would annoy them terribly. But yeah, I just want you to understand that this is my speculation and others about the nature of the universe. Here's what we've learned. In the early universe, the universe consists of just elementary particles, and they so for instance, like protons and neutrons are attracted to each other with the force we call the strong nuclear force. Okay. Now, just as I talked about the expansion of the universe and the elegance of it, same thing is true at the level of these quantum particles, namely that the intensity of their attraction is also elegant. If the attraction had been less or greater, we would not have the order we find in the universe. The point I want to make, though, is this, and here's where you can see I'm stepping beyond Newtonian physics. I think the attraction between the proton and the neutron, which is a strong nuclear force, is the future stars that are calling to them. The stars are calling to the elementary particles, so that one day the stars can come forth. So we say it again, which is slightly less, provocative.
We can be provocative here.
I guess, I keep thinking in terms of I sort of want scientifically educated people to
I
understand with the conversation, and it would be that the future, right, is not yet. It's not yet, but we are building the future.
We're building the probabilities for the future.
Yes. And one way or another, our decisions are bringing the future forward. So the way in which the future can actually appear to us is through our fascinations. So among protons and neutrons, we call it the strong nuclear. Among humans, it's fascination. It's the same fundamental force, but at a higher level.
So moving curiosity to fascination to excitement, maybe.
Yeah, there'd be a spectrum. So now I'm getting closer to your. Here it is. If we look at the early universe, we know it's going to create stars. We know. So somehow the future is there in a different form. Here we are now, and the future is calling us. And your fascinations, Renee, are different than mine. Everybody has a unique spectrum of fascinations, but the universe, so to put it in individualistic terms, the universe has a notion of what it wishes us to become. As a general view of humanity, there's a vision of what we are to become, right down to the individual. A specific course of action is being called forth. Now, with every decision we make, when we make it in alignment with this future, then the probability that we will reach our fulfillment, our creativity, is greater with each decision we make. When we make a mistake and fail in some way, we put off the task for a while. We have to overcome that. But that is, I know this is highly speculative, but it certainly has served me. And I think people can recognize this. You know when you're making decisions that cohere with your destiny, your cosmic destiny, because it's exciting, it's creative, and there's also a deep sense of peace. Even in the midst of agony and suffering, there's a sense of peace of like, this is what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
That was a long answer.
No, but I think you're spot on, because you're, in esoteric circles, or more esoteric circles, they'll call it the soul's journey. Sometimes we even refer to it as that, right? The soul's journey, or the soul's calling. Your higher self is trying to get you to a place of where you need to be. That alignment that you're talking about, right? Like when you're in alignment, you just know, whether you call it your soul's alignment, your higher self, or whether you can't handle any of that language and you call it the internal compass that speaks to you, or that still point. I mean, everyone's got different language that they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I think we should honor that as we're going through this kind of metamorphosis, because there are all sorts of different kinds of phrases to get to the same place, right? And I think we need to honor what it is for everyone.
I do too. Well said. Yes, exactly, Renee.
Yeah. So I think, the more scientifically minded people who are listening, be open to having your world turned upside down and inside out.
Just that. It's a little thing.
And likely for the people on the other side of the fence who are more esoteric in nature, be open to God maybe being the cosmic soup and having that be okay. And that's a little bit of a turning your life upside down and inside.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter, does it? I mean, it really doesn't matter what we call it.
No.
What matters is the oneness, the interconnectedness, and the love that we feel when we are in alignment to what we're designed to do.
And that goes right back to what you brought up before, that feeling of alignment and of love. That is the universe experienced directly. And when we, like you said, it doesn't matter what we call it. Well, people have fought wars.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So the religious wars, when they fight over the symbols, that's an example of what Thomas Berry was talking about as an intellectual and spiritual sickness.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've lived in 11 countries, so I can assure you, there were places I have lived where people are like, get out of there. There's going to be a war, and I never feared, it's funny. I never feared. I, feared for my life more in Detroit than I did in South Africa in the middle of apartheid, or, even on the Gaza Strip. I don't know. I just never really had a fear in these places. I don't know why.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
But so let's now move into another area that I got excited about. Teilhard de Chardin, right? Because you bring him up. And I haven't read enough. I've read a little bit, not a lot, but I've read all of Cynthia Bourgeau's books.
Wow.
Every single one of them. And of course, she's a huge fan and she talks about him constantly. So I was like, wow, here he is again. He keeps showing up. You say that his biggest contribution is the recognition that science has discovered cosmogenesis, which is the title of your book, and that the universe is coming to know itself, which is kind of what you were just talking about. You talked about the meaning of our existence is to provide a space in which the universe can reflect upon and activate itself in conscious self-awareness. So coming to know itself, go deeper there.
Yeah. Yeah, I will. And let me go back just to the word noosphere, because I agree it's a little bit of a strange word. But just to give a quick little introduction, 4.5 billion years ago, when the Earth was forming, it was all molten rock. And then as it cooled, it formed continents. So we can call that the geosphere. And there are, without any question, there are many billions of planets in the Milky Way that have formed a geosphere out of molten material. Then a billion years later, life emerged on Earth, and it spread around the entire surface of the Earth, forming the biosphere. And then now, beginning 300,000 years ago, humanity emerged, and this thinking being, and spread around the planet, the noosphere. So it's one way to make the word, I don't know, familiar. It can be also called, the noosphere is the knowing sphere.
Yeah, that's easier.
Yeah, the knowing sphere. So I mean, it's
consciousness. So it's expanded consciousness in a way.
It is but of a very particular way. The consciousness of humans is very similar to other mammals in lots of ways. The emotionally very similar. The mothers bond with their offspring. Whether you're a dog with puppies or a human being. But there's one aspect, at least one, but one important aspect where human consciousness is different. And that this is the key point that Teilhard makes. With human consciousness, we found a way to externalize our consciousness, our feelings, our thinking, externalize it in forms that endure through time. So with writing, on clay tablets, the invention of paper and print. In this way, what we come to understand in one generation is handed on to the next generation. Now, there is not another species. There are 30 million species on planet Earth. There's not another species that does this. Not another one. And I don't want to say, that this makes humans superior. That isn't the point. We're not better than former, animals that are gone extinct, even the ones that exist now, but we're different. And we are trying to understand what this difference leads to. And it's hard. it's resulted in such warfare and all the rest of it. But just to get the point across, if a chimpanzee, like a really brilliant chimpanzee, comes along and comes up with these like unbelievable insights, and somehow or another, with grunts and signals, conveys it to his friends and her friends. Nevertheless, when that group dies, that knowledge is gone. Whereas with us, we capture it in language and we pass it on. So you and I, Renee, have minds that have been learning things for 300,000 years. That's why we became the dominant species. That's the kind of mind we have. It's so powerful, and we're still trying to figure out how we can live in a way that is in harmony with the geosphere and the biosphere.
Yeah.
So that's the thinking is a new form of life, and we are just now realizing it. And we create so much hardship, not because we're evil people, but because we're trying to understand and integrate a power that has never existed in the history of Earth.
It's a cumulative knowledge that has this compound interest effect, right? It's this, well, yes. The exponential growth, the singularity that Ray Kurzweil talks about.
Yes, absolutely. All of it's related, exactly.
So if we do need to experience ourselves so the universe can continue to creatively experience itself through us, right? Because it's like what you're saying is if it's always changing and it's developing and it's creative and we are it and the universe is us, then what does that look like in everyday life? Like, put another way, how do we directly experience a developing universe?
There's the cosmic level, which I've been talking about a lot. So we had elementary particles, and then they developed into stars and galaxies, right? And then there's the biological level, where we have the first forms of life became more complex as time went on. And now we have the human, and the advance of humans over time, and all of them it's 3 different levels. Okay, but one point to make, I would say this, that to guide our thinking here, we have to focus on the nature of relationship. So just going back to the cosmic, you have these elementary particles. They're so tiny. We can't see them. We can interact with them experimentally, but they're so tiny. And then they come together and form atoms. Tiny, can't see them. And then the atoms form molecules, and then they form stars. Now, and galaxies. But what blows my mind is you have these little tiny particles, and they form galaxies. Nothing comes from another universe. It's just these elementary particles deepening their relationships that builds these fantastic galaxies. Now that is the point. I mean, that's what we've learned, you see. So in other words, relationship, the essence of relationship is creativity. Let me do it again with life, all right? With life, we have the first cells. For 2 billion years, life consisted of single-celled organisms, smaller than the pinprick of a little pin, right? Tiny. They start to hang out and deepen their relationships. And eventually we have lions and elephants. I mean, I have to say it again. Nothing new came here. These little cells got together and they found ways to survive and develop into these amazing beings. So that's what we are doing too. Humans are. And we don't have to go out to another place in the universe or anything. We are, through our deepening relationships, we're giving birth to an entire new way of being human.
Yeah, that's cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's the universe showing us what matters, what's real. And that's why I like that, the sense of wow, we the San Bushmen, when the anthropologists first got to know them, they didn't have a word for human. They didn't. Other groups were not seen as human, but with differences. So we've grown into a larger understanding of what is happening, and that is the noosphere, and it's impossible to predict what's coming forth. But the one thing I can say, what is coming forth through deepening relationships.
And deepening relationships to each other, to the universe, but also what about in our consciousness, right? The consciousness of, right, this is like age old sage, right? That the fear, whether it's the Buddhists or, the ancient Judaic, it doesn't really matter. The Sufis, right? It's all about the separateness is our suffering, is that we see ourselves as separate. So a newer, more united, deepening consciousness, right, of this unity consciousness says that we're connected to everything. We're connected to those trees. Take care of the trees. We're connected to the water. Take care of the water. Don't throw plastics in the water. So, it's common sense, but unless we feel that connection to the all, we're not going to do anything about it. The people who are doing something about it feel that connection.
So it's so essential. Yeah. And I maybe this would be what you're saying is really relates to me the culmination of my book, Cosmogenesis. I think you'll like this. This is one way to describe the form of consciousness or the form of experience that is emerging. And this is just one way. I'm not saying it's the only way, but okay. And this goes back to your question. What about ordinary life? What about ordinary life? Okay. So next time you're out on the paddleboard and you're under the stars, just think of this, what I'm about to say. So we, when we look up at the stars, what we know now is that the elements of our body, carbon, phosphorus, oxygen, and so forth, each of those elements was constructed by a star. And the star develops these elements and explodes. So when you're looking up at the star, the elements of your body, let's just focus on your eyes. The elements of your eyes were created by these stars.
Amazing.
So you're taking in the star that was who you were in the past. Now, but what's even more astonishing is that the elements didn't just create your eyes, they also created your awareness. Your awareness. It didn't come from some other place. The elements of the stars were drawn together, they complexified, mind was emerging. Mind, the fish has a mind, porcupines have minds. They develop further and further. And now we have the human that realizes it's looking out at that which created its mind. So if I can call the mind the inner, so when you're on the paddleboard, the inner is experiencing the outer, which gave birth to the inner.
So the octaves playing their music in the universe is also playing the music in us. So you wrote that we were the primal atoms, speaking of our 14 billion year existence. And then you wrote that the spirituality of a galaxy is the galaxy's intrinsic creativity. The most direct revelation of spirit is the creative synthesis that has been given rise to every entity throughout time. I think that's what you mean by the cosmogenesis, right? That it's...
I do. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I, like by having just that image of, you have these little particles that are, these little cells that are smaller than, a pinprick. And then you have over here whales and elephants, all right? Well, the movement of deepening relationships brings forth new qualities. And that is, for me, that is what spirit is. Spirit is the creative synthesis. I mean, just imagine these little cells getting together. They had no idea that they were going to bring forth a lion, you know what I mean, over billions of years. And that is, so that's that, oh God, it was so much easier just thinking that, 6,000 years ago, God took soil and made Adam and then made this and made that. That's easy to imagine. But to think that the universe itself is bringing forth entities that never existed before, it's such a thrill. And
with
that's
different levels of consciousness too.
Yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
we're tapping into different levels of consciousness because consciousness doesn't exist just inside the brain anymore. We know that now.
Yeah, and I would even say that that forms of consciousness that never existed before are emerging.
But did non-local consciousness always exist? We just obviously didn't have that language for it.
And yeah, that's one of those really deep questions.
Scientists hate that question.
Well, I guess I know I love the question, but I just think it calls for a lot of humility. In other words, I don't have I have a sense of different forms of consciousness emerging through time. That blows my mind, and that this is all taking place within a universe that is intelligent in some strange definition of intelligent, not like a human. It's like an amazing intelligence that's different. And this is an intelligence that's giving birth to aspects of consciousness that never existed before. Now, how to understand that that's a challenge.
Well, that's because our brains don't think in quantum terms, they think in linear terms. And so for us to get our head around exactly what's happening, the quantum universe is what it is. And there is the multi verse, if there is the multi-worlds theory, if all of that is correct, if string theory is correct, then we will never understand it with our linear brains. We're going to have to get outside of our linear way of thinking altogether to even be able to process it. And I don't even think we have the tools today to do that.
But I believe we're inventing them.
We are. Yeah.
And
which is super exciting.
It's super exciting. Super exciting.
Yeah.
And requires a cosmic patience because it's hard. It's going to take a long time.
Yeah, no, it's a really exciting time to be here, actually, where we're waking up to the things that we don't know and we're being okay with that. went in so many different directions, some of which I planned, right? And some of which just went on a wild card. But do you have any sort of parting words? And obviously, we'll be putting up links for people to be able to order your book and where to find it and find out more about your work at the Institute and CIIS and everything else that you're involved in. But parting words for people who are listening to bring it all together.
Maybe one last idea that people might enjoy. So that so there are different phyla of life, right? They're the chordates. We have a backbone. You have the sponges, but they're only something like 30 phyla altogether, and they took shape 500 million years ago. So there hasn't been a new phylum in 500 million years until now. This was Teilhard de Chardin's insight. He said we have to understand that human beings form a new phylum, an entirely new phylum, and there are scientists, mainstream scientists, that agree with this. And the way they say it is that in terms of our anatomy, we are nothing other than another primate species. But in terms of our mentality, we are something like a new phylum.
Wow. That's beautiful, actually.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So it makes you wonder what's after us.
Yeah. And what role does this new phylum have to play in this amazing planet?
Yeah, absolutely. And co-creating with us and with the universe, because we're all part of it together. Divine plan of some sort that we can't perhaps get our linear brains around, but if we maybe go to our hearts more and try to feel into the changes that are happening, maybe even scientists will get some new observations that they didn't get before.